We haven't heard much from Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois. Now that Carney has called the election, he's spoken to the press, and he did so in English. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. After the announcement of the election, the Bloc Québécois came in front of the cameras today. It looked like all of them were there and at the one microphone. They were all in the same shot in the frame. Of course, being members of the Bloc, they spoke only in French. Now, Yves-François Blanchet, I've always told you, is a capable and competent political individual. And I mentioned many a time that if there becomes down to a French debate, and you might say to yourself that Carney will maybe hold his own, he will not hold his own against Blanchet. Now, that's relevant for a whole bunch of reasons. What I really want to bring home is that during this press conference, of course, all of the French media asked the questions, and the answers were exclusively in French. And then two of the corporate media from the Canadian side of the aisle asked a question in English. And to my surprise, he answered those questions in English, which surprises me because of the Bloc's ideological stance and their complete disdain for the English language. However, it speaks volumes to the political mind of the person. Now, before I show you exactly how the savvy of his individual comes to the fore, I want you to understand something. We are looking at all these polling numbers, and of course, every regular viewers of the Canadian Shield understand my position on polling. I have a lot of experience in mathematics, and I know that it's a flawed system. Nonetheless, I want to address it because a lot of people are thinking in their mind, oh no, they're running neck and neck, they're running neck and neck. And they are, according to many of the polling that's out there. Some reputable polling sites are talking about how they're running neck and neck. And I won't get into the flawed system in that. I want, however, to just lay out something for you. So in Quebec, they do not really vote conservative like ever. In their mind, the Conservatives represent the English speakers of Canada. How accurate that is not really relevant to this conversation. What is relevant is that is the way that they believe the parties lay down. So there's a lot of seats that the Liberal Party gains from Quebec and from Ontario. If you were to look at the electoral map and you were to remove if you were to remove Quebec and Ontario out of the equation, you would find that the Liberal Party possesses very few seats in addition to, outside of those two provinces. They are the bulk of the representation that the Liberals have in the House of Commons. Now, you can argue, well, there's some from Newfoundland and there's some from, but not in the numbers that I'm trying to get you to appreciate. So in Quebec, the voting typically swings between the Liberals and the Bloc. When the voting, now, most Quebecers are fairly politically up to date. They might not understand what's going on in British Columbia, but they have no problem calling to task their politicians inside of the province of Quebec, whether they be the Bloc, whether they be the CAQ, whether they be the Liberal. And they swing back and forth depending on what mood they're in. Like if they're mad at the Liberal Party, which they currently are, they will vote for the Bloc. And if they're mad at the Bloc, they will vote for the Liberal Party. Now, many of you might be asking yourself, what's my point? The point that I'm trying to get you to understand is as the Bloc slips down, that number will now go back to the Liberal Party. So when we look at them running neck and neck, what we can say with certainty is that it's not so much that the Conservatives have come down in support, because they really haven't. It's that the Liberal Party has taken support away from the Bloc in Quebec and has taken support away from the NDP in other parts of the country. But in this one, we're going to be talking about the Bloc because they're the ones that came to the camera and they're the ones that spoke English, which shocked me, surprised me until I did a little bit of thinking and I thought, wow, good for you. So I'm going to let you hear a couple of things before I bring this home for you, because he says some significant things, and the way that he handled the press is also kind of something that you, as a person who might not necessarily be paying attention to French-only media or French-only social media can't appreciate when we talk about the factor of Carney versus Blanchet. So, of course, they had two questions. And the first guy says to Blanchet, he goes, what are you doing about the fact that you are so far down in the polls versus Mark Carney? How do you hope to address it?
I read Newton. What goes up goes down. If that's good for me, that's good for Mr. Carney. Let's see.
So let me translate that to you for people who don't understand the way, because as he's talking, he's translating, right? And what he said there was the quote by Isaac Newton is, what goes up must come down. And he's referring to how his numbers were up and now they're below. And if it works for Mark Carney, meaning that if his numbers have gone up, then it can also work for me, meaning my numbers will go up. Let's see what happens. So that's a fairly confident response. And I think that it shows his lack of concern for Mark Carney. Then the reporter asked him a question about putting the pipeline through. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it was.
There are so many reasons why I do not agree. I can repeat them easily because this is such a bad idea. It came very fast and under the pretext of trade between provinces in Canada. This has nothing to do with trade between provinces in Canada, because there was no debate about trade between provinces in Canada when we refused that in 2015. And it's exactly the same project with the same goals. The idea for Western Canada is to unlock Canadian oil and gas in order to have the price of Canadian oil and gas go higher and reach the same level of price as oil and gas from anywhere else in the world. There's nothing for Quebec in that. And when you speak about energy, selling energy, for Quebec, it's not from west to east, it's from north to south. And what we sell to our American friends in New England is clean energy, is green energy. And this is much more the future of Quebec than any other form of energy. In 2023, about $30 billion were generously given to the oil and gas industry, which does not need it. 7 of those billions of dollars came from the pockets of families in Quebec. And this money was not spent in our economy, in clean energy, in agriculture or aluminum or lumberwood or innovation, research, high technology. Why would we spend that much money for Western Canada in order to pay twice for the same thing, if not 3 times?
You'll remember how Mark Carney was out west telling them that he's going to turn on the taps for the oil and gas. And then you heard, Blanchet just say now that he doesn't believe that it's a good idea for Quebec. Now, he said a couple of things that were just not accurate, right? Like when you shot it down in 2015, there was no tariffs in the United States, so that's going to be a little bit different. And the James Bay project was paid for by the federal government, and you're selling that electricity down into all parts of the United States. That's where they generate their electricity from, because Canada has that kind of amounts of electricity. We just don't have any, there's nobody that's done anything about it. Just like all of our energy, it's been locked down by the Liberal government for so long. You'd almost believe that they would rather us just be sleeping in mud huts. So Blanchet is now saying that I'm not. Now they are going to run with that in Quebec, right? That Carney is promising to give the pipeline to Alberta through Quebec. And if the individual that's casting a vote decides that he doesn't like that, if the individual decides that, in fact, the pipeline does not benefit Quebec, they're not going to give Carney their vote. Now, do I agree with his mathematics? Absolutely not. Do I agree for 1 second that he talks about how he doesn't want to put Alberta oil in his cars, but he's going to put Saudi Arabian oil in his cars? None of that oil comes out of Quebec. So why, right? The jobs and the money and the revenue, it's not about raising the price of Alberta oil. It's about getting it to the market of, Europe. It's about getting it to Europe. And along the way, there's a lot of jobs. There's an oil refinery in Quebec that doesn't do much, like that's pretty quiet. There's ways that Quebec could be making manufacturing and earning money off of it because there's that kind of money. I mean, I want you to realize in your mind that Dubai, everybody has a Lamborghini. Yeah, that's great. But they also have the kind of money that desalinates the ocean and then puts it into the desert. So this is serious cash. And I'm not sure that Yves-Francois Blanchet is understanding or grasping that. But when it comes down to whether or not people will support Carney, who's telling, it doesn't matter if Carney's intending on putting the pipeline through Quebec, there is record of him saying that he will do it. He's told Alberta that he will do it. And then Quebec will hear that. So what we're talking about here is how the Bloc used that already out of the gates as a way to point to Carney. Outside of the island of Montreal, they're not going to really be as diverse. They're going to be very francophone. So they're going to want to know that these things are being looked after. So this was a very astute answer. Whether or not you agree with the facts in it is not what matters. What matters is that when we're talking about whether or not he can take market share of Quebec back from the Liberal Party come out of the gate saying one thing and then saying another thing, talking out of both sides of their face, as the expression goes. And that's not going to play well with voters anywhere. We just got to hope that the voters are paying attention. The next reporter asked him a question about how the polling is indicating that support for separation has gone down a lot. And his answer, again, was pretty good.
I do not have the feeling that Quebecers trust so much Mr. Poilievre. And I do not have the feeling that Quebecers know so much about Mr. Carney. So if what they propose is good, they have nothing to fear, because as we did in the last 6 years, we will support what is good for Quebec. And if something is not good for Quebec, what would be the point for Quebecers to support somebody that will do something bad for Quebec? So I believe that I might not want to become Prime Minister of Canada, believe me, but I will to be as strong a leader as I can.
I think the word is nonplussed. He's not really worried about whether or not Carney is going to come into Quebec and try to sell a non-separatist ideology. He probably realizes that like all of the polling is going to be taking place in Montreal, and outside of Montreal, the world of Quebec is much different. Even in many sections of Quebec, of Montreal, there are two different philosophies. However, there's still a province that has no money. They got $13 billion in transfer payments, in equalization payments just in January, and they're already talking about how they got no money. So who's going to be the one that's going to help them earn that money is really what's going to have to boil down to for the electorate, just like the electorate all over Canada. Anybody who votes to remain poor is going to get what they deserve. They're going to have, debt out the yin-yang. They're going to be choosing between rent and electricity and food. That's not going to change in Quebec, though they do have an enormous amount of electricity, so the rates are pretty low in Quebec. But if the jobs are not being generated, and I mean outside of Montreal, if those jobs are not being generated, then there will be a problem. And we can say with certainty that the country of Canada, from coast to coast to coast, is being impacted negatively by the economy. And I don't believe that they know Mark Carney is what he said, and that means that they don't trust Mark Carney. That's the point he's trying to make. They might not trust Pierre Poilievre because they don't like the conservative moniker, but because they don't know Mark Carney, they're not going to put their faith in him like they might with, Yves-Francois Blanchet and the Bloc to look after their interests. But you heard him, well, if it's good for Quebec and we lose, we'll support it just like we've been doing in the House of Commons now for 6 years. If it's not, we won't. And that's the kind of talk that the electoral francophone likes to hear, that he's going to look after me, the little guy. Mark Carney is not going to be looking after any little guy, not any of us. He's not about the little guy. To him, the little guy is only there to make him wealthy.
I believe that in any instance, under any circumstance, one should never vote because of fear. One should try to find reason in what he or she hears or reads. So fear is not a reason to vote, and we will try to force logic and rationality and information with your help, you all, in that campaign, in order for democracy to work its way out. And in our case, I'm glad to say that it's the first time since 2015 that we can afford all bus only for reporters and journalists, which I don't fear.
The question was, what are we doing about Donald Trump's tariffs and how everybody in Quebec might be scared? And as a result, they're going to be casting their vote out of fear. And you heard him say exactly what I've been telling you all the time. We think our way through these things. We don't overreact. We don't get into the drama on the Canadian Shield. And we analyze with the calculated assessment, which is exactly what he said. I mean, he just said that we're going to hope that we can project that kind of calm onto people and it will work its way out through the electoral body. And this time, since the first time in 2015, I'm glad to say that we can afford a bus so all of you can follow us around from campaign stop to campaign stop and report on what's happening instead of maybe being on a hit and a miss, which indicates that their bloc has more money than they've had in a long time, and support for separation might be stronger than the polling is allowing us to believe. So now we can see that Yves Francois Blanchet is not intimidated by any of the things that are coming out of both the polling or the corporate media that is bought and paid for, that has a vested interest in your downfall and in continued destruction that's brought on by the Liberal Party. Let's not forget the many years of gaslighting and how they want to censor us, that they can say whatever they want even though it's not true, and if you try to say one thing, they try to come after you. And I suppose that's not the right video for that. So we can remember that all of those kinds of tricks are being used by the Liberal Party. And how will the individual who may vote for the Bloc or vote for the Liberal Party accept that? I get that they're very excited about CBC Radio Canada, but how excited are they about CBC itself, CBC Television, or CBC websites? We don't know what the main issue might be outside of separation versus tariffs versus Trump versus Carney. And now we will know because the press is going to be able to follow them around from stop to stop. Though there won't probably be much English coverage, there certainly will be coverage available that can be translated. I think that what we saw here was a masterclass in politics. I don't have any affinity for the separatists, I'll be honest with you. However, this video was about your getting to understand the political savvy of Yves Francois Blanchet and how toe-to-toe Mark Carney doesn't stand a chance, not even in the slightest. There is no way in the world that Mark Carney will be able to articulate himself in French the way that Yves Francois Blanchet is going to be able to do. And if you try to take it on an English to English argument, he's still going to be able to exude calm, he's going to be able to exude stability, and he's going to be able to take a question from the press without losing his cool and starting to snap and throw a tantrum like a spoiled, rotten, CEO who's never had anybody question him in his life. I wanted to show it to you so that you can understand that it's not over yet, and that though everything is trying to convince you that it's a problem so that you will either vote with the herd, or you will say, well, I'm not going to bother voting. I mean, that's really what they're up to. They're trying to brainwash you into thinking that your position is not the position held by the bulk of the country. They try it all the time. They tried in Germany, they were wrong. They tried in America, they were wrong. What we have to do as a voting population is vote. We have to make sure we get up. There's no excuse I will accept. I mean, I get it if maybe you are in, the hospital or something, but otherwise, I need you to get up. You need to go out. You need to cast your vote. You need to make your vote count, and only then will you have the right to complain about whatever the outcome is. Because without Quebec and without Southern Ontario, I think the Liberal Party has 75 seats in Ontario, I believe, if I remember right. Without those two places, the Liberal Party can't hope to hold on. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.